Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. See, we have a lot of people from the public here. It's great to see. Anyways, I'd like to call the regular council meeting for Monday, February 10th to order at 6:30. Just a territorial acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that we're meeting on the traditional territory of the Algonquin-speaking peoples, represented today by the Kasepsin and Songhees nations who have stewarded these lands since time immemorial. May I have a mover and seconder to adopt today's council agenda as presented and receipt of the near and long-term agenda, please? Thank you. Councillor Ward and Councillor Olson. Any discussion? Seeing none. Any opposed? Seeing none, I'll move on. Mayor's message. I just have a couple administrative things. First of all, I'd like to thank Councillor Grove. He's coming up to the end of his term as the acting mayor at the end of the month, just so that you know. And thank you very much. You filled in very well for me during my absences here. And just a heads up that Councillor Day is the next acting mayor, and she will be filling in as acting mayor effective 1st of March to the end of June. I don't anticipate any long periods of absence during this time frame, but she may be asked to fill in for me for conflicting events. There was quite a few of them last term, our last 4 months. Just a couple things, a couple promotions here. If you could join Reimagine West Shore for a film screening of the documentary In My Backyard. And that's happening right here in the council chambers on February 19th at 6:30. It's a perfect prelude to CD Saturday coming up on March 8th. And the next announcement again is Reimagine West Shore is also hosting their next Repair Cafe. And I know quite a few people in here are involved in it. This is coming up this Saturday from 11 to 3 p.m. at Gordon United on Goldstream Avenue. And on that note, I'll move on to item 4, which is adoption and receipt of minutes. May I have a mover and seconder for the adoption of council minutes from January 27th, 2025, and receipt of the Emergency Planning Committee meeting minutes from October 15th. Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Grove and Councillor Ward. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none. Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 5, which is public participation. We had no written submissions that were received for tonight's meeting, and no members of the public have registered to speak virtually. And seeing as there's no one from the public here, I will move on to the next item, which is item 6, which is unfinished business. And we'll get Kathy to come up and do her thing. I think Kathy, correct? Okay, so we're just going to be very, very logical about it this time. We've got a presentation, and how we're going to do this is we're going to step through each of the recommendations. We'll discuss each recommendation and vote on each recommendation as we go along, just to move this along. Okay, Kathy, over to you.
Thank you. Okay, yes, as you mentioned, we talked about this 2 weeks ago, and today we're hoping to move forward on some of the conversation and topics that council had a chance to discuss. So for background, that was the meeting on January 27th. We discussed the report and the recommendations. The staff report focuses on policy recommendations. I guess I don't need to just read slides to you, people who've read this already. And the budget is at 46.9. That's 0.15% of the 2025 operating budget. And in my review, I did not encounter any municipalities that do not have a grant and aid program. They work within the legislation to create criteria and policies for awarding them. However, to Councillor Ward's posit last meeting, council could choose to eliminate budget in future years. This meeting today is not about budget. It's just about this program as the financial plan is coming up later under bylaws. So there was a question last meeting about the amounts that we are paying for the fee for service and cost sharing arrangements and agreements. So this is just an outline of what those amount to, 310,000, and the grant and aid budget is a much smaller piece of that, as I've mentioned, amounting to 46.9. And this slide is just, once again, you've seen this before.
Pardon me, can you just go back, Kathy, just for
Yeah.
1 second?
I mean, maybe I can.
Thank you. Great, thank you.
You're welcome. This is more just for informational purposes, and like we spoke about, the context can be, it's really based on council's direction and council's objectives. So, for policy review, grants and aid are the mechanism by which council provides financial assistance to organizations for purposes that are considered to be in the interest of the community and provide services not already provided by the city. So during the review, we came up with recommendations, and those are listed here. And they are the, I don't know if you want me to repeat them, but they were these broad 8 categories, and we're going to revisit them all on the next slide, starting on the next slide. So the first recommendation was that we expand eligibility to include sports organizations. And I'm not sure, Mr. Mayor, if you want me to read all of this, since we did talk about it on January 27, or if council would like to commence dialogue, or would you like me to revisit what the findings were?
I think that what I'll just do is, it's pretty obvious what the recommendation is. I'll just gonna open it up
Okay.
for discussion, and then we can vote on it. But I do want to, before we start on this, I just want to make a point here. Just these standing grant and aids that we have right now, we do hear from the Chamber of Commerce. No, we haven't heard from the Chamber of Commerce. Like, I guess part of this deal, I always thought, was for these people that got these big dollars, they're supposed to come in and tell us what we got for our dollars. I think there's some accountability. I don't recall receiving that from, for example, from the Chamber of Commerce. What did we get for the 15,000 or whatever we gave them? We heard from Arts and Culture. They came out and they said, this is what we did with your money. But I don't recall seeing any of the other groups, not unless you get it or something. You get a report or something? Am I
Well,
missing something?
the organizations that are under the fee for service and contracts, their obligations are outlined in the contract.
I see.
So they should be meeting those obligations through that, but we could, of course, request them come and speak before us. As far as Chamber of Commerce goes, I'm less informed about that arrangement. I don't know that we have a contract in place.
Your worship, if I may. So we did have a presentation from Julie Lawler, it was about a month ago, I think, in the context of the new $16,000 agreement that would go forward. There was a component of that presentation that went over work done in the past year and then work proposed for the upcoming.
Okay. Yeah, I sort of recall that, yeah. Okay. But we don't hear from anybody else, right? So as long as there's got to be a check and balance. As long as I'd be satisfied even if staff said, yes, they did what they said they were going to do. I'd be satisfied with that if I got that certification. I don't necessarily need them. It's nice to hear from them because the public would like to know because it is public money, but I don't know about the other organizations.
Yes, thank you. That's good feedback.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll just move on here. I'll just open this up for discussion. If anyone wants to make comments on the eligibility to include sports associations. Okay, Councillor Day and then Councillor Jensen.
Thank you. To move things along, I'd like to just make a motion. And my motion is that we not expand eligibility to sports associations. And I'll just motivate my reasoning for that is that nonprofit does not mean volunteer necessarily. So there are paid positions working for nonprofit societies. So I'll just pick on one that I used to belong to, the soccer, in Juan de Fuca soccer, which my family participated in. They do have some paid positions, and certainly parents are paying for them. And it's my feeling that we're trying to provide more services within Colwood than would otherwise be able to be achieved. Often, the organizations supported provide services through the use of volunteers from the community. And I think that is responsible and once we open it up, we're going to be spending more time, not less, looking at grant applications. And I just think that we have finite resources and we need to have a good reason for providing the grants. And I think when we're supporting volunteers who are giving their time freely, that's very supportable to provide the things they need to do that volunteer work.
Thank you very much. Can I get a seconder and then we can just, okay, thank you. Councillor Jensen seconds it. So we'll continue on with the discussion. Councillor Jensen.
Thank you. Briefly, I find myself in agreement with Councillor Day, and there's just so many opportunities for sports organizations. And not only that, they're quite large. And so they can quite quickly mobilize to fund their events, quite good at it. And I think for me, I'd rather see our finite dollars focused at some very specific groups that are adding to our community in a different way, a different dimension than the sports. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ward.
I take the opposite approach. I think this reflects an inherent bias from council that sports groups are somehow less deserving than arts groups, where this council in the past has funded an organization in a significant amount of money to use it for marketing purposes, to look at developing a theater, for example. I also don't see anywhere in the previous slide where it defines sports groups as large. I keep hearing that term. Large sports groups can raise money. Well, the Legion can raise money. Big Brothers Big Sisters can raise a lot of money. I would argue that we're applying descriptions to organizations that don't show up anywhere within this report, or any of the research, or any of the tables. And I would draw your attention to the table that was prepared under optional methodologies, where the recommendation is listed. It clearly indicates that eligibility does not mean entitlement. Council can still choose not to award. And my concern is that we run into a situation down the road where a fledgling group comes forward that wants to do a therapeutic program for kids with autism, something like that. Somewhere where, and I speak from lived experience with a special needs child, that they can't go sign up for Juan de Fuca soccer. They can't join up this local swim team. They need special services, usually at a higher ratio of providers to students. So by making this decision and excluding sports teams, you don't even give yourself the opportunity as a council to consider that. You would have to start to get very creative with your definition of what that organization is. So I have some concerns with perception becoming reality here. Again, like I say, when we start talking about it, we're making assumptions that are unfounded, that this is solely talking about large groups within the community. And if that is the case, then we're being hypocrites, because there's a lot of other large groups that are listed here that have massive fundraising arms, and yet somehow that's okay. So yeah, it doesn't sit well with me, I'll be honest.
Thank you very much. Councillor Grove.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The sports teams in general, what I'm thinking of as sports teams, large or small, doesn't really have any bearing in my opinion, is have facilities, and that city contributes to a large degree through those facility providing. And the pickleball folks, the basketball kids playing, tennis courts, hockey rinks, soccer fields. There's an awful lot of facility paid for, supported by the taxpayers. I think that for me, the grant aid I thought was targeted more for small startup groups. Actually, speaking to what Councillor Ward just mentioned of some kind of a therapeutic thing, I don't think that the existing definition precludes such a thing, whether it be sports oriented or not. But I support this exception, the motion, because I think that there is enough support through the facility for the sports teams as it exists now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Day, second time.
Thank you. I was going to mention that as well. That had been on my notes that I don't have at my fingertips tonight, but the dollars that are put into recreation that support sports are significant. And that's one of the reasons why we did some additional supports for arts to try to help them help all of us understand what it would take to get that type of endeavor off the ground. Sports have millions of dollars worth of infrastructure that's been being put into every year for many years on end, and has been looked at. It's been a factor in many other decisions between municipalities, even in terms of who's carrying, the load for sports in terms of recreation services within the West Shore. So it is a part that really matters. It's mattered a lot. And I'm not suggesting that we don't do that. I'm suggesting that we continue to provide sporting fields and facilities that are necessary to the sport. But just that for our grant and aids, we're not looking at doing it through there.
Thank you very much. Councillor Jordison.
Thank you, Mayor. I think it's important to determine what this grant and aid is being used for. Like, is it modest seed funding each year for community facilitated activities and new and special projects, or is it just for anything? Like, I think that needs to be determined, and if we could use that wording and we kept it to that sort of thing, then it's case by case, which could include sports teams as well, or sports related, like what Councillor Ward was suggesting. I don't know. I think that the issue here is that we're not determining kind of what the criteria is. Is this seed funding? What is it exactly?
Okay. I'm just going to go back to you, Kathy, on the intent of the grant and aid. I read the way the grant and aid is set up right now. It is sort of that seed money, and yet we didn't ever have a term on it, right? And it was looked like it could be done in perpetuity, and you're trying to fix that with a recommendation tonight, in fact. But that's my understanding. But could you clarify that, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We don't currently have language in the policy that defines it. To Councillor Jordison's point, the policy says that it's really just providing financial assistance to these nonprofit and registered charities that provide complementary services that enhance the social well-being of Colwood residents. So that would be a change to our policy if we want to change that's why it's so open and allows all these varied applicants, is because it is not specific to just seed funding or projects or it doesn't make the distinction between projects and programs. It's just not annual. It's just not intended to be annual funding that supports operations.
Okay, that's my understanding too. It's just that one of the things that why this is so inconsistent, and I'll just make an observation, is that last year we allowed a few of the applications to go through, even though we say very clearly in our policy, you have to be a registered charity, right? It says that in our policy. And yet we allowed a few to go through, and we were grading them. And I looked at the policy and then I applied that to how I was grading things. So anyways, I'll move on to Councillor Ward.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on that because I see us going in a circle on that one where we want to use that as a reason to justify not spending, for example, on sports groups when we all were in favor, I recall the last meeting, of continuing funding to the Legion, for example. So we got to be careful where you draw a line. If you say, well, it's a one-off seed money thing, there goes the annual funding. That's a budget line item for the Royal Canadian Legion for their breakfast, right? So I believe that we need to move some of those items out of the grant and aid to a regular budgeted program that we do annually. But at the moment, this is a different discussion. And I also am picking up on things again, talking around the sports piece, talking about infrastructure. We're not talking about building soccer fields and things. So I know they have facilities there, but the Legion has a facility. Big Brothers and Big Sisters has facilities. So again, we're talking apples and oranges. We're not really addressing the issue. Councillor Grove mentioned sports teams. Again, we seem to be fixated on the idea that we're only talking about uniformed sports teams, a hockey club, a soccer club. You know, I'd remind you of, for example, a local example, Victoria Screamers, bocce club that plays out of Colwood Church. People with spina bifida, cerebral palsy, autism, they're reliant on volunteers, very little money. It's an opportunity for people who need movement in their life to get out and do things. And, you know, a small grant from council in the, you know, year of the Paralympic Games where they're trying to do something extra might be very appropriate. But if we go ahead and say now, nope, sports are ineligible, again, it doesn't say in here sports teams. It says sports clubs, sports organizations, whatever the term is. So we're drawing a broad definition because some of us seem myopic in the sense that all we're focusing in on are organized, large, well-funded sports teams. I'm not talking about donating 20 grand to JDF soccer. I'm talking about people like the Screamers or a future organization that could emerge and say, hey, I see a place in Colwood for, you know, kids with a disability to learn about, you know, the environment in Havenwood Park. And then we go, you know, throw a ball around later and learn motor skills. Now they might call themselves the Outdoor Sports Club. Are they now no longer eligible? I think what we have to consider here is that under the recommendation from staff, we give ourselves the room. In council, I can sense the way it's going. So, hey, a sports club comes up in the next grant and aid, it's going to be a 6-1 vote in the current council against giving the money. But at least we have the opportunity there. So if a different sports organization comes forward that 4 of us believe merits support from this council, we have the opportunity to do it. That's all it is. This isn't a final decision. So I would err on the side of flexibility, quite frankly. Thanks.
That's a great point. And I think there is a compromise here. I really do. I mean, if you want to be technical, Wounded Warriors Canada is sports because they run. We know, but yet we contribute to it. So I understand your point. It's a very valid point that you're making. So I think if we can, is there a way to change this wording? Like, I do understand, like, I know the kids playing soccer and hockey and all these, you know, bigger sports, these well-established sports, and I don't know what you call them here, what the classification is, but their parents pay big bucks, you know, for them to participate. And I think that, you know, because the way it was worded right now, it's just opening up a Pandora's box to me. And once you do that, you can never take it back, right? As we learned here, lessons learned once you give something. So if there's a different way, I think the compromise is how we word this, because I do agree with you, because that bocce thing was helping people's health, older people and all that. And I didn't classify that as a sports organization myself. I didn't personally. That's why I voted for it last year. So, but is there a way of doing this? Do you think, Kathy, how we can word this?
Certainly we can amend the wording to reference perhaps the maximum dollar budget that this organization is asking for, or cap the amount of funding that council would entertain awarding, because then the larger organizations wouldn't be interested in applying to our program, presumably. Some organizations, some of the municipalities had very specific criteria for sports grants, and even it had to be all the members are under 21 years of age. So sort of targeting more of a youth group, which could also still be a larger organization, or that will only fund tournaments or events where the Colwood name or the Colwood brand is being socialized or promoted, because it is bringing people to Colwood, or people are learning about Colwood because one of our teams is participating in an event outside of Colwood. There's so much variability that it's really hard for me to choose the words for you. Sorry.
Councillor Day, she has a solution. I know it.
I guess I'm just really resonating with the conversation that we're having here, because when I started on council in Colwood, we had a strict no grants policy, but money was still given out. Not as much as we give out now, but it was given out. And it was given out because it's hard to close that door down. And what I thought we were trying to do was reduce the amount of time that we spend on giving a small amount of money. It basically comes down to what we're trying to do, because we agonize over these grants every year, and every which way we've done it has been difficult. So I'm not predisposed towards some groups and not towards others. I'm just looking at our big picture that we do fund Wisher Parks and Rec. We do have sports fields and facilities that we have supported for many, many years to create and expand and recreate again. And any which way we narrow our focus, it's easier to pick holes in, well, if you're going to narrow it for them, why don't you narrow it for that? And it becomes very difficult. So, I mean, we do have limitations. I think we all recognize that we have limitations, and we all, and this could change in a year from now when we decide we don't like how this particular iteration worked. It does evolve over time. So I completely agree that there are some sports organizations that would have a very valid case for applying for a grant. So whatever way we do it, I think it's better to leave it open for council to consider those things and find a way to manage that process internally. I don't love that it was kind of done outside of the council chambers, if you will, by doing it through each of us filling out a matrix and then seeing who came to the top, because that doesn't really allow the public, I guess we published them in the end, but it doesn't really allow the public to see how we agonize over these things, but maybe that's fine. But I was just trying to find a way to leave the most discretion with council and allow the public to understand what our limitations are. And we are already spending considerable amounts of our budget on sporting things. And I thought the grants were an opportunity to provide for other things. I do see the gray in there, that it's not black and white. So I just offer that it has evolved over time. It's gotten bigger rather than smaller and more diverse. And the reality is that the natural environment and the arts are both way behind what sports has received in terms of funding from the city.
Kathy, please.
Thank you. Council may want to consider just rejecting this recommendation at this meeting. And then, as you're aware, a lot of these recommendations, we are recommending public input and public consultation. And so this could form part of that conversation as we look to, do we want to introduce these concepts of micro grants or different kinds of layering of our grant program? So in creating categories. And that way, like it's just for this year and council can reconsider it. We've already put that this policy will be up for review in September 1. That was an internal review. And then we can talk about how council would like us to prioritize that. I haven't talked to Sandra if this would be a topic for Ideas Fair or not, or just like a survey or what mechanism we would use. But there is an opportunity that we could revisit it before the next, not this current year intake, but before the 2026 intake, and resolve these other loose ends.
Okay. I'm in agreement with you actually, because this particular thing is not broken, because I think the bocce people got the money last year. And so, the process worked. So we didn't have to, say this, which does would have precluded the bocce people last year, for example. So I think the process works. So I'm of the same opinion as you. I would vote against this just to leave it as is. But anyways, that's my last comment. And seeing no other comments, I will call the question now on all those in favor of the, no, it was of you, it was your motion, yeah. And her motion was not to include sports organizations and seconded by you.
Sorry, can you say that again?
It was, yeah, no, it's not to that recommendation because the motion that was made was to not include sports organizations. So anyone in favor? 2, 3, and those against? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that recommendation is not passed. So that was the recommendation to not include sports organizations. Now we go back. Does anyone want to make this recommendation, or we're just going to leave it? Oh, Councillor Day, you're making the motion, or go ahead.
I'll make the motion that we not amend the grant and aid policy.
This recommendation.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Seconder on that. I'll second it. We just don't include this. That's all we're saying right now.
Sorry.
You
I didn't
understand?
Sorry, the motion that I made was that we stick with the grant and aid policy that we have for this year. That based on the recommendation in front of us. That's what I understood was discussed a minute ago here.
There's 8 recommendations also. Just this recommendation, right? No, what the motion that was on the floor was not to include sports organizations. So we killed. Just not to provide direction on this particular recommendation. Correct? Is that where you want to go, Kathy?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Each recommendation is worded this way because they're being considered in isolations. Thinking we could move through the agenda a little more quickly,
Yeah.
because in order to make that change, we do have to amend the grant and aid policy. So this slide in its entirety was just not approved.
Right.
And then that the next slide will consider the next amendment to the policy.
Okay, so we move on then. We don't need to do anything further then. You understand the direction? Go ahead, Jen.
If any member of council at the table is desirous of moving a recommendation that council consider expanding eligibility to include sports organizations, please do so at this time.
There we go. And then you want to talk to it, Council Ward, again? Or are you just moving it? Okay. I'll get a seconder and I'll get you to motivate. Can I get a seconder? Okay. Councilor Olson and Councilor Ward, over to you to motivate.
Well, I mean, I've said my piece. I believe that we should include this because, again, it doesn't pen you into a corner. You can make a decision when the time comes, whether you believe a sports organization by any definition is one that merits deserving of a grant. So there is still a decision to be made in the future. I was a little bit concerned about the previous motion because there are itemized recommendations here, and to simply say we're not amending the grant and aid policy would bring us to the end of this section entirely and would be problematic. So with that being said, I move this recommendation. I support it, and I believe it makes sense.
Okay. Got the seconder. Do you want anything to add further on to that, Councilor Olson? Nothing? Okay. Okay. Any other discussion on this? And I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And let it show that me and Councilor Day opposed. I just beware, that's all. You're just going to get inundated. Okay, recommendation number 2. Go ahead, Kathy.
Thank you, and I apologize. The narrative on the first two slides is a little bit, the sports logic now is now on this slide. This recommendation is to expand eligibility to include community-based associations. And this information was shared at the last meeting. If you'd like me to speak to these reasons, I can. But the motion is that council consider whether or not to provide direction to amend the grant and aid policy, and that council consider expanding eligibility to include community-based organizations.
So just a question before I look for a mover on this one. Can you please more narrowly define what a community-based organization is, please? Because it should be part of that policy.
Yeah, and sorry, the reasons are on this slide. So the community-based organization are, where did I go? Oh. Yes, so organizations that are recognized by the city of Colwood. So this includes a lot of the dry grad committees and like the organizations that aren't as legally formed. They're just grassroots forming organizations, or dry grads is the most common one that the city of Colwood sees. Because they're not a nonprofit and they are not a registered charity.
Thank you. Back to the recommendation, please. Yep. I just need a motion first before we even discuss it. Can I get a mover, please, and a seconder? Okay, there we go. There we go. Okay, now Councillor Jensen, discussion.
Well, once again, I'd like to move the recommendation.
You just did. Second, no, we got a seconder, actually. I got the motion so that we can have the discussion. If we couldn't get the motion, there's no sense discussing, right? Okay, we're good. Quick, call the question right now. Is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. Let's move on to the next recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The next recommendation was that we change our application deadline from November 15th to December 31, based on experience in the region and on the also the feedback from applicants that our closing date is much earlier. Our budget is not based on these applications, so there's no need for us to be early.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Day, Councillor Grove. Discussion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. Let's go on to the next recommendation. Thank you.
The next recommendation was that the city establish a maximum grant of $5,000 based on feedback and concerns we had heard from council. There seems to be history that we rarely reward more than 5,000, and this would achieve the objective of distributing more funds to more organizations that's the feedback we received from council previously.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. So it's Councillor Olson and Councillor Day. Discussion. Seeing none, any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. Let's move on to next recommendation.
The next recommendation was to establish a maximum of 5 consecutive years of grant award. Again, this was in response to concerns by council that some organizations were relying on the funding. Although perpetual funding was removed, there are still some organizations, like we've talked about, the RCL, etc., that do apply every year. The staff recommendation was that we do set a maximum of 5 with a 1-year reprieve.
Okay, motion please, and a seconder. Okay, Grove and Day. Oh, open. Oh, seconder. Okay, Councillor Councillor Ward, and I'll open it up for discussion.
Oh, sorry. I think it should be 3. I think 5 years is I think it's too long. I think it should be 3 years. And that should be the maximum.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Jensen.
Thank you, Worship. And we have had this discussion in the past. Clearly, there's over the years, the historical application of these funds has been consistent with some groups. And we have had discussion in previous budget years about moving some of these things to ongoing line items. And perhaps there is a mechanism for that. Maybe the finance manager can advise us, like, for instance, you know, if we are supporting the Legion year over year for as many years as this report goes back, is it time to move some of those funds into a line item in the budget? I'd love some feedback on that, because I mean, I'm going to support them again, so I just wonder if there's a different way to go about this, consistent with what Councillor Ward was thinking. Thank you.
Kathy?
Thank you, through the mayor. It would be not a true contract for service as in the sense that they exist today, but I imagine we could find a spot for it within the budget under a different, not a donation, but we could certainly add these as line items and determine what category they're falling under
And
for the next budget.
for the next budget year, thank you. Just some thought given to that. There does seem to be some consistency with certain no-brainers like the Volunteer Society and the Big Brothers and Sisters. And maybe it's time to recognize those groups more formally, or acknowledge them in our budget more formally if we're going to continue to support them. And then we can free up, you know, at least our application of what's left over to the rest of the groups. As far as 5 years, I mean, I'd have a tough time turning away some of these groups just because it happens to be their 5th year. I struggle a little bit. Quite frankly, I'm on the fence, but I'm willing to see what my colleagues have to say. Thank you.
Councillor Ward?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to see an amendment potentially to this to recognize organizations that will seek repetitive funding, but that for all intents and purposes are new every year. Dry Grad was a great example where in theory you would stop at 5 years, that they've hit their maximum consecutive time, but it's a different group every single year. So I think there's a lot of I just think it's too soon to go with this recommendation. As much as I support it in principle, I like the idea of establishing a finite time frame, but I think we have to look at the effective date. First of all, is that effective this year? And then, as Councillor Jansen said, anybody heading in year 5 gets cut off, or year 5 or beyond. Do we make it effective next year? I think we need to give ourselves some room to take a look at the criteria. What are we trying to achieve? Who's on that list? Where do they fit? You know, the Legion, for example, is a great one. Do we move that out into park that elsewhere? Dry Grad is another one where, is it fair that 5 years of grade 12s get it, and the 6th year we go, sorry, too bad, so sad. So I'd like to buy us some wiggle room. So I can't support it the way it's written right now. I would actually look to just defer this and have a discussion around what we can do with some of these groups and what other criteria we can put in there.
Thank you very much, Councillor Day. I don't know how you got shifted to the last. I'm sorry.
It's okay. This is one where I feel quite strongly about. And the reason I feel strongly about it is because of our past history, where we're seeing this, where people were naturally being approved every year because it was something that we, you know, everyone felt we were getting good value for, and where people were coming back and giving us those presentations to tell us about what they're doing in the community as well, made a big difference. And then we started moving people to these line items, and then suddenly they got dropped off the line items. And it's a lot of work to do the grant and aid applications and to get all of everything put together and come here and make that application, which is great when we don't know anything about somebody, but asking them to go through it again and again. So I think we need a process that would be really clear in terms of when this would take effect, when you would be off, you know, and when you would, to make it clearer when to apply or not bother applying. if you're not going to be eligible, you don't want to go to the effort of making the application. So and especially for small groups, that's a bigger deal because they don't have the time to put the hours and hours into a grant that maybe they're getting a few $100s for. So I think it's very important that when we consider establishing a maximum number of consecutive grants, that we do it in a very clear and well understood way. And I don't support doing it at this time because I think there's too many changes leads to a lot of confusion. I think keeping our envelope as a percentage the way we have is been a very good move. And I just think that establishing these maximums is going to make it difficult for organizations to follow our process of what's allowed and what's not allowed.
Councillor Jordison.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to remind council that this isn't our money. This is taxpayer money. And I just think it's really important that this is supposed to be a modest amount of money. And if there has to be standard requirements, and I mean, that's just the right of having a program like this. You can't, there has to be standard procedures on how you apply for things. So you can't just not have, they have to put the work in to get the grant. I mean, it's the same thing that kids do in post-secondary education. They apply for grants, takes a lot of their time. But if they want the money, they need the funds, that's just part of it. So I think we need to be cognizant of that. But also, I think if we're gonna look to move things to line items and that, it comes out of the same bucket of money, and it needs to be explained why these people on this list get their funding every year and why these people have to come and get their funding, and it's going to take away from the other people that are applying for new funding. So I just think that like these other organizations that are getting funding from us every year, does that need to be looked into as to why they are? Do they function as they function on their own too? Like, I guess I'm not understanding the difference between the two. So I'm just bringing it forward that it's just creating more red tape to me.
Thanks very much. Okay, I've got my turn and then I'll go to you, Councillor Ward. I have a question for you, Mr. Johnson. I need some advice here, just in your experience. First of all, I'll be very transparent and say that I'm not a big fan of grant and aid to start off with. So let me be very transparent about that. But I do understand it, and there are some great causes that we do support. So don't get me wrong. If I didn't believe in it at all, I'd put 0 all the way, but I don't do that. I guess my question is, because what we're talking about, there's these donations that we make every year. They're donations. And, there is sort of an obligation on our part. But then again, I started thinking about this. And the reason why I'm so against this is because myself personally, I will tell you, and I've talked to enough taxpayers, and I would say they're more fiscally conservative type of taxpayers. And, it's like some charities I refuse to donate to myself personally, because I have a criteria and I look at how much of my donation goes to their overhead. And if it's way too much, I do not donate, period. And as anyone can attest to around this table, I'm very generous. Anytime we go to any of these events, I donate. And, just recently at the Wounded Warriors, I thought I had enough of donating, and I donated a big chunk of change again, another 3K, but, I do that. And so it's not that I'm, that's a personal choice though. And, we have these things that we donate to, but not necessarily all our taxpayers actually believe in some of the things that we're donating to. Do you know what I mean? Like that there are some people that really get angry. So my question to you, I'm getting to my question. Sorry for being long-winded here. Yeah. So is it normal for a city, because I don't know, is there a normal for a city to have another pot? So these are the standard donations that council will sort of say, hey, these are the things that we'll always give to, so we'll always give to it. They don't have to apply every year. And is there another pot for grant and aid? Is there something, is there a mechanism to do that? Or how does that work?
If I may, I mean, there's a number of reasons that these recommendations are made. You know, as you've heard from some of the fellow councilors tonight, this policy is to ensure the accountability of these taxpayer dollars and to outline the eligibility of when council will or won't consider extending a grant. So I would strongly advise that council not look to enabling distribution of tax dollars without parameters in place. And these parameters are put in place by way of whatever you choose to include within your grant and aid policy.
Grant and aids are probably one of the most political things that council touches. And that's why it's a lot of debate around the table, because there's a lot of different views about what grant and aid should be used for or shouldn't be used for. And that's why you see council struggle with this. Every organization I've been with has struggled with grant and aids. You'll spend hours on grant and aids at, you know, this amount of dollars. And then when you go into the budget discussion, it's a lot quicker. So you can see the inherent issue with the politics. And what we're trying to do is figure out, where does council want to allocate their time and allocate their resources based on some policy decisions. And that's why we've brought these forward for you for consideration. And so it might feel tough, and it's because of the politics involved with one member of council wanting to support one area, another and another. And it's really the will of council that we're looking for to give us some guidance as we enter into the grant and aid process again for this year, so that we can learn the lessons of what didn't work last time and what do we want to improve. And it's an ongoing process that I would anticipate we'll deal with again next year, based on what our survey is and based on what our information is on how council has dealt with that through this grant and aid policy. I hope that answers your question, Mayor.
Yeah. Sort of. Yeah, just as confused. Councillor Ward, please, for the second time.
Mr. Mayor, I think, you know, I don't disagree with you, and I question the validity of the program as well, and taxpayer concerns. And I think one of the things we've done in other areas where we want to solicit feedback from the community is establish committees. And this to me brings up an interesting scenario where we're putting the cart ahead of the horse, trying to establish, you know, timeframes and things like that, when we know full well, all of us at this table, there are a number of annual recipients in there that we don't want to see cut off. And I maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but I go back to the January 27th meeting where there seemed to be almost unanimous, you know, kind of a shared opinion on the Legion, for example. I'll use that one, you know, that we don't want to arbitrarily cut them off over a quick decision. So what I would prefer to do is, I would remind council that under section 142.1 of the community charter, we can establish and appoint a select committee to review a specific item. So I would like to move that we do so. We establish a finance committee around annualized recipients and grant and aid. That would include members of our finance team. It has to legally include one member of council and perhaps one or two members of the community, no more than 5 people ideally, and report back to council what annual recipients do we want to move out of the grant and aid program and receive money annually. And I would propose, obviously, or at least float it out to the table. You know, the Legion is one, obviously, we would probably find unanimity in. Dry grad is one that certainly I could see as something, you know, I don't want to be the councillor that cuts off dry grad and defunds Remembrance Day. You know, that made news in Victoria and it wasn't very popular. So my motion would be to refer this to a select finance committee, or to have council appoint a select finance committee and refer this item to them to come back with recommendations on which groups should be looked at on an annual basis. And then from there, we'd be able to move forward and set a maximum consecutive term, which I would agree with on every other grant and aid recipient. So I'm looking for a seconder on that.
Can I get a seconder on that? Okay, Counselor Jordison? Okay, discussion on the, on this, wait a sec. We've got a motion on the floor, right? Sorry. Yeah, yeah. Yep, please, go ahead. Counselor Day.
Thank you. As attractive as that sounds, because it would get us out of the hot seat here tonight, I can't recommend it. And the reason I can't recommend it is because this is a political issue. And when we first set up committees in Colwood, the finance committee very quickly found out that it's very difficult for the citizens to weigh in on those political matters because you're, as a citizen, somebody's going to love you and somebody's going to hate you, and that is not a position to put a citizen in. So if you want to form a committee to talk about how to do this, to include a certain number of regular recurring grants that would occur to organizations that have been receiving grants for a long time. That is a political decision, and I think it should be done at this table. And I don't foresee that that's an easy seat to put a citizen in.
Okay, thank you very much. It's, I think it's not to do with these recommendations in actual fact, because these are, you know, to me, clearly in our area, scope of responsibility. I think what Councillor Ward, and you can correct me, I think what he was referring to are where we want to do those regular donations to. So I don't think that's political, but that's, Kathy, please, sorry.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, if this recommendation is passed, year one would be 2025. And you, as we've talked, we will be having a review in September of this year. So if it is council's desire, we could work this also into the consultation and feedback that we are intending to do on the other items that we are recommending consultation. And then in that way, we had talked last meeting also about these two different tiers of funding. And so it's in that first tier. I think staff would prefer that we keep them under grant and aid, but we develop that tier one, which is those organizations that council determines are the recurring ones that qualify for that category. It's just that we were hoping not to introduce categories in this review, this amendment, until we have time for the public consultation. But it would be still 5 years away, if that makes sense.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ward?
I appreciate that, Kathy. Thank you. I think there is an opportunity there to, if the seconder agrees potentially to withdraw that motion then and explore that route. My only concern though is that it's not a given. If we accept this motion and we vote for it, then we're stuck. That's 5 years. So I would caution council that, you know, if you're making that decision on the Legion, well, I hope you're prepared to defend it publicly because it's not going to be a very popular one. Let's put it that way. But I'm willing to take the risk and withdraw if the seconder supports that.
I think that was Councillor Joyce.
That was George. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're back to the original motion. And seeing no other discussion, I will call the question. All those in favor?
5 years.
Yep. Councillor Grove and all those against. That's the rest of us. So motion is defeated. Next.
The next recommendation is to include a section on how the request aligns with the city's strategic priorities. This is on the application, which is not typically covered under the policy, but lifted up for council's consideration.
Okay. Can I get a motion? Okay, Councillor Olson. Councillor Jensen, seconds. Discussion. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I think that's council's work to do and something that an astute grant seeker could consider using as an argument why their grant application should be supported, but I don't think it should be a requirement because that means that we're asking small community-based groups to look at our strategic plan and do something for us. But in order to do that something for us, come and ask us for a grant, which involves a lot of work. So I think that I just don't see that being a real help in determining the grant and aid. It's certainly something we could take into account, but to ask them to do that in their application, I think is a little unfair.
Councillor Jensen.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I'd hate to think we would preclude somebody just because somehow we hadn't contemplated it and it just didn't fit into one of our boxes. So I'm going to be opposed to this. I think I seconded it, but I'm still going to oppose it. Thank you.
I think that this is just my humble opinion. You know, in a lot of these applications, they're usually talking to someone on council regardless, I think, and even with staff. And I think they can get help with that part of it. But I do like the tie-in, to tell you the truth. I really like the tie-in. We tie everything else into our priorities, so I don't see why we shouldn't tie this in, just my humble opinion. Anyways, I don't see any other discussion. I will call the question. All those in favor of the motion? Okay, and those opposed? Councillor Day and Councillor Jensen. Motion carries. Next.
The next recommendation is to include a section in the application to demonstrate commitment to inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility.
Can I get a motion so we can discuss? Motion, Councillor Grove, seconder, Councillor Day. Do you want to motivate Councillor Grove at all? Go ahead.
The previous recommendation suggests that we their application aligns with the strategic priorities, and I think that this recommendation is one of those.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Day, you have anything to add? Okay. Oh, no. Any other discussion? I'll call the question. I have a question for staff because I know what idea is, but I'm just trying to understand the context here for the applications. So you have to prove that there's an element of inclusivity, diversity, equity, and accessibility. Is that the idea behind this? Please, Kathy.
Sorry, thank you. It's not that it's a requirement. It's an opportunity for applicants to demonstrate how their application addresses any of these 4 elements of IDEA, and then it's council can, you know, give any weight to that if they choose to. But we're trying to promote these values across Colwood, and this is one area where we can raise awareness of IDEA.
Okay. I hate to ask this question. It's really bad. I'm the mayor, and I don't even. Where's our IDEA policy? Is we got that hanging someplace?
The accessibility one?
No, IDEA. What is our IDEA policy?
I don't have that policy handy other than the accessibility one. Do you, Jen?
I'm not trying to be a jackass here, really not, but I just don't, I still don't know what this means.
The city has a couple of policies that touch on this area. I would suggest we do not have a policy that speaks to all aspects of IDEA. Coming up on the next council agenda, you'll be hearing a draft, which our corporate officer could speak to, plan with respect to accessibility.
Yeah, so I guess that's to my point. My point I'm trying to make is that we don't even understand it ourselves, and yet we want it in an application. And it means 7 different definitions here. I'm not trying to be a pain, but I'm just saying this is why I have problems just sticking that in here. Because I think we're just sort of ticking a box, and I don't think it has any substance behind it, but what do I know? I get kind of emotional.
The intention here is to recognize an opportunity to consider such information in this realm.
I hear you. Council Ward?
Is there any weighting on this, or is it just a category? Like when we look at that matrix to complete, does that have some sort of scoring attached to it, or will it, do you suspect? I mean, it may not be finite yet, but.
Thank you, Councillor. Not at this time. That is one of the recommendations that we were hoping to defer, is establishing weighting criteria, because it's more involved. This was just to give organizations an opportunity to raise up those parts of their application that touch on these socially and culturally, I don't want to say prominent, but they are definitely in the, we're trying to raise awareness, I think, around those areas. If Colwood supports that, and again, it's for council to determine.
Yeah, I personally just have to bring it up because I find it interesting. A couple of years ago, you'll remember I was on the losing end of a 6-1 vote about permissive tax exemptions for a church whose website promoted gay conversion therapy and some rather hateful things. So, you know, they've also applied and successfully got a grant from us under this program. So if there's any weighting to it, they wouldn't have met any sort of inclusion, diversity, or equity criteria. So something to consider there. Find that kind of funny anyway. So just, that's a comment, not a question.
Thank you. I know how you're gonna vote. Councilor Day?
Thank you. So yes, absolutely. Equity, inclusion, diversity, and accessibility do mean different things to different people. But we certainly have been very alive to accessibility and inclusion here in Colwood, due in large part to 30 years of work by tireless community activists, as well as the world is getting better at these things, I think. Not perfect yet, but we're all works in progress. But I really want to stress that for me, I mean, we're all on our journeys of learning continuously, and I'm sure I have lots to learn. But I'm hopeful that we aren't going to try to use this policy to put council in a box where they can't advocate based on their understanding of the situation. So I do think that we have thought about and looked at inclusion and accessibility just by the conversation that we've had here tonight about some of the grants we received in the past, and where we recognize that some groups do have barriers that they have to overcome, like the church group that's working on bocce and going to the Paralympics, and those are things we can recognize and see and try to advocate for. But there's a ton of barriers in the world that are not visible. And I think we all know that a little bit more than we ever used to, but I just hope we're not going to a point system. We need to, as elected leaders, demonstrate our good judgment and show the community who they voted for when they choose to support us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, that's great. I'm sorry, I get a bit emotional when I see this. I usually get stuck on these IECD committees, and basically I find it insulting. And especially when we're going in and we don't even understand what this means. So if I get a bit emotional about it, I'm just explaining myself to staff that I get I feel insulted by this, to tell you the truth. That's why I cannot support it. Not that I don't think it's a good idea. And as long as we're all going in, we all understand, there's a common understanding what this means. Okay, thanks. At this point in time, I will call the question. All those in favor? Councillor Grove and Councillor Jensen, all those opposed? The rest of us. Motion doesn't carry. Last.
Thank you. The final recommendation is to include a final report form to assist in evaluation adjudication, as well as, I don't know what that means, recovery. This is about standardizing the final report. So today it's fairly ad hoc.
Okay, please. Councillor Ward makes a motion, seconder, please. Okay, Councillor Jordison, discussion? Do you want to motivate that? Go ahead. Sorry, Councillor Ward, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I'd be hard pressed to find anyone opposed to that. I don't think, provided the final report's not too onerous, that's something that we've asked for previously, and I think it completes the circle, you know, and that we can understand, you know, what the money was used for and were they compliant, and it just, case in point, you know, there was a Victoria Foundation donation that was funded to one agency that ended up into another agency that became quite contentious. I won't get into it, but you know, because there was a lack of awareness of where that money was going to end up, it ended up in the hands of some people that they may not have wanted to have it. I think the risk of that is quite low here, but I think for us, it closes the loop and makes sense for me.
Thank you. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I would prefer, rather than just a form, I would really like agencies that receive a grant from Colwood to come and tell us how it went with their project. You know, it can be short, it can be over Zoom, it can be, but I think the community wants to hear what we supported and how it went. And I think that's important for the agencies that are utilizing these grants. It's not very exciting when they tell us, you know, when the Legion tells us, yes, we put on a really nice dinner for everybody. I'm still happy to hear from people and how it's going, how their numbers are. It encourages people to tell us the real stories, the story behind the story.
Okay. Would you like to amend that to include a verbal report too, or is that good enough? And we just get them to do that? We could do that through staff, right? I believe it. Yeah, I know. Go ahead, please. I'm just asking a question. I'll go for you.
If I may, staff would be looking for direction of council should you wish to receive feedback that way. There has been a number of conversations with respect to whether or not grant recipients should be required to come and speak before council. Consideration to some grant recipients may be quite comfortable with that expectation. Other grant recipients may not be comfortable. So we would be looking for a council resolution should you wish.
Thanks so much. Councillor Olson?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that would be a lot of staff time and a lot of council time to have verbal, you know, reports coming back from the recipients of the grant. I mean, I like the idea of having a final report that, you know, where they can clearly state how the funds that they used were successful in their programs, but, you know, those could be submitted in a way that we can share it publicly, like people that are interested in hearing about it can, you know, link it to the website or somewhere where it's just accessible for people and, you know, have a good news story. Councillor Ward was just stating, you know, like if there are a couple that, you know, would be comfortable coming in and speaking to council, we could make the time to do that. But I think that it's unrealistic to have everybody come back. I think we could have those reports just made publicly available online. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Council Olson, Council Ward.
Yeah, I was in agreement with Councillor Olson, but I do agree with Councillor Day, like hearing from some of them could be of interest. I think all of them, though, is where I had an issue. It just sort of story time could really drag on. I'd be amenable to amending the second form just to say that council consider include a final report form with a council option to summon one or more recipients to present if required. Basically, if there's one really good news story in there and we want to bring public attention to it, then we would reserve the right to do so. But otherwise, I think bringing all of the applicants forward would be extraneous.
Okay. Did you get that, corporate officer? Okay. And can I get a seconder for that amendment, please? Okay, Councilor Day. And seeing no other discussion on the amendment, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. On the original motion as amended. No other discussion. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Okay, motion carries. Thank you. And we did have a bunch of not recommended. And if anyone feels vehemently that it should be part of the recommendations, they can raise it at this point in time. Otherwise, I'm going to move on. Okay, I shall move on then. Thank you very much, Kathy. So these political things are kind of difficult, and I do realize that and understand it. Thank you, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you guys for yours. Thank you.
New business, Sandra.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for this opportunity to present the draft Colwood retail strategy and to seek direction to proceed with finalizing the document and engaging stakeholders in crafting a value proposition for the city. As you know, with a growing number of commercial areas in Colwood and a desire from residents for more retail and restaurant options, staff were directed to create a retail strategy to better understand the types and amount of retail most likely to thrive in Colwood. As presented in the staff report, we've been working with consultants from Liquor Geospatial and Urban Systems to prepare the draft strategy with input from representatives from the Colwood business, development, and leasing community at a series of prosperity roundtables. And so I think we have on the line Aaron Liquor and JP. Aaron Liquor is the principal at Liquor Geospatial. JP Rollo-Lapointe is senior consultant in land economics at Urban Systems, and they have more detail to offer about the methodology used to prepare the draft strategy. So I'll turn it over to them.
Good evening, everyone.
Hi, guys.
I'm here. Everyone can hear me okay? Apologies
Can't
in
hear you,
advance. Oh, you can't hear me. Great. 1 second, please.
No, we can hear you. I can.
Okay. Can everyone hear me now?
Gotcha.
Okay. Apologies. My kids are also going crazy in the background here. So if you hear any random screaming, it's not me. So I have this little slide deck here. I'm just going to bring it up and share my screen. Can everyone see this?
Yep. Very good.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so yeah, just have a small little slide deck here to share with everyone. This is basically we'll do some brief introductions to myself and JP, who helped draft the strategy, which I hope you all read and enjoyed. I'll discuss our general approach to the project. We'll briefly touch on a broad outlook for retail in Colwood. We'll talk about what we heard from the business community through the Prosperity Roundtables. Love to hear your thoughts on the draft, and then we have some next steps. So, yeah, hi, I'm Aaron Liquor. I'm the principal Liquor Geospatial Consulting. I am a spatial analyst by trade and training, which means I look at spatial information and spatial data and draw inference. Generally, I work for many municipalities. I think we work for about a good 60 around British Columbia. We provide kind of expert information to help communities do better planning. As seen here, I specialize in data integration and nerdy analysis. I'm joined by JP, and I'll let him introduce himself as well.
Hi, JP Rollo-Lapointe. I've been working as a development consultant for about 20 years. Much of that has been retail oriented, working with mixed use developments, downtown revitalizations, and learning how retail interacts with other types of land uses in communities. And we've been working with Aaron since before liquor geospatial started, and it's a good combination of working with his geospatial technical skills and some of our experience with putting retail developments together.
So, yeah, very briefly, the fine folks at your municipality hired us to evaluate the relative strength of retailing in the community and to provide some support on emerging opportunities for expanded retailing in Colwood. We've prepared a retail strategy to this effect. Our strategy really focused on technical analysis, so really understanding what the size of the market and the community is going to be, and how much more retailing can be fit into the community. We also looked at competition on the West Shore. We looked at prevailing trends in retail. We looked at generic needs for retail space, and then some very specific needs for where retail expansion can actually be accommodated in all of your retailing areas. Our project had a few kind of sub-deliverables. One was a comprehensive retail inventory of the community. So what we did is we combed through your business license database, and we also worked through some open data and some other listings to develop a understanding of where every retailer on the West Shore pretty much was located. We did this because we wanted to build a competitive demand model for the region. So basically understanding if you put a retailer in one spot in the community, how many other folks would they compete against and how much market could they capture? We did this for the development of retail demand model. This model is responsive to mode choice, population increases, and competitive retail locations. We did a fair bit of research into your the recently released CRD Origin Destination Survey, which indicates how far people travel for retail. On the West Shore, they travel a great distance, so our model basically encompasses the entire West Shore and digs into View Royal and a bit into Saanich. We looked at future population, we looked at the current market conditions, and then we modeled the extent of opportunity in all of your nodes. And finally, we provided some good commentary, I think, on how these areas can evolve given the extent of protected demand. If sometimes I talk very quickly, so if I'm unclear or you can't understand me, just stop me and I'll clarify. Briefly on this slide, I'm just going to touch on the highlights from our study. And these are recommendations that were basically derived through our engagement on the Prosperity Roundtable. Some big components here are just how strategic you folks should be when you're considering retail expansion. There is not an infinite market for retailing on the West Shore and not an infinite market for retailing in Colwood. That being said, the population growth in the area is going to be substantial, and there are some areas that are still underserved. We believe that there is a decent possibility for growth in Colwood Corners, and to a lesser extent, Royal Bay. To achieve this, we have some strategies that we've just developed. I'll touch on those in the next slide. But broadly for all areas of the community, some decent advice. And one of them is to grow your daytime market. So our analysis, we focused on resident population. Colwood doesn't have the largest daytime population. That's workers or students or tourists. And increasing this market segment will really help aid the viability of retailers in the community. We also focus on analysis on the Allendale lands. That's a very interesting site. Obviously, it's quite large. It's graded and it's well located regionally. There are currently some kind of fast retailing there. Our recommendation for that site was to keep it as employment lands, but that may merit further study. The recommendation is based on the fact that these lands are quite a bit more valuable regionally from an employment perspective, and again, to grow that daytime market might be helpful. JP, do you want to talk about the next bullet here?
Yeah, so there was some general retail trends and points to keep in mind for how retailing works. And with the competition in Langford, you know, we really thought that focusing on retail quality would be something that could set Colwood apart. Public realm investments could be more complete streets, multimodal access, flexible design for different types of businesses. The buildings are going to last longer than the businesses in many cases. Programming, activating streets, and the right mix of uses, and that can really be strong anchors or clusters of different types of businesses can really drive traffic into a specific area. So those are some of the general comments. There's quite a few more in the report. Another thing that came up is updating the zoning and parking bylaws. And Aaron, do you want to talk to that, or you want?
For sure. This
Yeah.
is some analysis we did subsequent to the submission of the draft you folks have received. So that'll come in the next draft. But I did do a little bit of a deep dive into your zoning bylaw for all of your commercial zones and your parking bylaw and how it relates to parking for commercial activities. By and large, your zoning bylaw is fairly comprehensive. Just perhaps some increases in specificity with regards to smaller commercial units and other kind of quasi-commercial uses such as temporary uses or pop-ups. There's some great language actually in your C8 zone around maintaining an active retailing storefront, and we feel that could be progressed to the rest of the community. And my final note is that your parking requirements seem a little high for most of your commercial uses, which may negate the development of these properties effectively. Basically, a large portion of commercial ground floor must be taken up by the commercial floor area needs to be taken up by ground floor parking, which may kind of sterilize some uses at the street front level, as well as kind of maybe impact development pro forma. Otherwise, the other thing just to consider in your zoning bylaw is perhaps to allow some explicit language for alternate uses, for pop-ups from our markets and temporary retailing areas. We heard a lot, I'll get this in the engagement slide, around the use of commercial lands for experiential retailing and really for kind of more fun activities that have a retail component. I think the terminology.
Excuse me, Aaron, can you speak into your mic? Because you're
You know,
echoing. Can't quite hear.
my apologies. I'm going to try a different audio source here. 1 sec. Does that sound a bit better?
No, worse actually.
Worse? Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to try something else here. Okay, I'll just talk very loud. Is that any better, or is that worse
That's
again?
better. Yeah, that's better.
Okay. I'll go as loud as I can. So as I was mentioning, your zoning bylaw looks pretty good. We were just considering some amendments to make it a bit more acceptable for pop-ups and temporary uses. And there's a bit of further study required for some of these elements. I'm just going to talk.
Just going back, excuse me, Aaron, do you want questions as you go on each slide, or?
Yeah, I'm happy to take questions on these slides.
So I just want to confirm, when you talk about Royal Bay, you're talking about beach lands too. So you're looking at calling that all Royal Bay? Okay, thank you. And the second question, can you just repeat what you said about Ellendale?
Yeah, so when we were looking at the Allendale site, there is some retail potential there. It is well positioned regionally. However, right now there's a strong potential for employment uses on the site. It's because it's so large and you can fit a large footprint. So given the kind of relative scarcity of employment lands regionally, you may get some additional value out of that location. And just building on my point earlier, Colwood does have a fairly low or small employment base, so increasing that will also help your other retailers by growing the daytime market. JP, do you want to add anything there?
No, it's just, you know, we've done some industrial work in the CRD, and there's a shortage of light industrial land. It's seemed to be an issue that's pushing demand from businesses up to the Cowichan Valley, up to Nanaimo. So it's kind of a southern island issue. So to have land that could be used for that might be a good fit for that seems notable. When we presented to business leaders, there was some discussion about how it could be a good fit for a brew pub. And that's true. Could be a great fit for a brew pub. The thing that Aaron and I spoke about is a brew pub could go anywhere and would attract people to, if there was one in Colwood Corners, it would really attract people there. If there was one in Royal Bay, it would attract people there, and having something that can attract people to create that sort of activity is a really is a powerful thing. And you could do that in Allendale, but it might serve more businesses and help other retail nodes if it was somewhere else. But you know, that there might be, there's other like, I think people were bringing up things about Allendale that was kind of beyond my understanding of the context. So that was just some of the things that we thought about considering that area.
Interesting. Okay. So just another question on that slide then. So I'm just trying to understand what the natural planning process is. So we have you're studying this for us, and you're telling us what could be potentially put in each of these nodes around Colwood right now, right? But then I think this is where it's becoming really disconnected in my head. Then you have to find a developer that wants to develop that way. And then they have their own marketing studies and they determine something else. It's like this pipe dream we had down in the Commons, where we were hoping to have a lot more of the what I call the boutique coffee shops, and you know, not the standard fast food joints that they have there. But the reality is they can't attract those type of businesses there. So we can do this pretend planning here, and they've got their planning. Like, what is the process? I don't even understand that myself. And when does council have a say in that? Like, if we want to have a visioning session and say, hey, we think these are the nodes, you've given us information, which is good for looking at that, but I would have thought that we would be the ones that are sort of putting that vision in of what we want in each of these nodes. But this is where my own confusion is. So what is the normal process, if you can explain this to me? Because, you know, I'm not an expert in this area, but I'm just saying that we have developers that have a say. And I know you have discussed this with the business community. Unfortunately, a lot of the people that you had at the roundtables and that information, a lot of them, the majority, were not actually retailers here in the city. So that's where I was there was another disconnect there. So I guess it's when do we have partake in this right now? What is our part in this? Because right now what we're being asked in the staff report is to endorse this report, which I absolutely will refuse to do because there's not enough input to endorse it. I'll receive it. I'll gladly receive it, but to endorse it, I don't want to say this is right or wrong. I don't know. I'd like to actually refer this maybe to a committee or something just for some expertise on this. But right now it's hard to endorse. So could you maybe explain what that process is? Is it your recommendations, or whose recommendations are we going by? Whose vision? I'd like to know, because I don't understand. I don't think anyone here on council does either. Please, Sandra.
Thank you. I think the idea was to gather this data from professionals who do this type of work. And so what they've recommended is what is viable in each area of Colwood based on, you know, square footage of commercial space existing and potential.
Yeah.
Based on population growth and other factors that are laid out in the report. And then absolutely, it is up to the city and our partners to, you know, determine if those play out and to put them into place. But this is simply the data that they've found, and it's quite strict methodology, I believe, for us to consider and then work forward from there. And so the plan would be to use this data to create a value proposition to then again work with our business community to implement it in realistic ways based on the best information we have.
Okay.
It doesn't dictate, I guess.
So just to the consultants here. So do you have like, I remember when my 40-year-old daughter was a kid and she had this software called SimCity. It was kind of fun. You goofed around with it. Yeah, I don't know, maybe a lot of you can remember that, but it just sort of showed you how, if you plan your city and how vibrant it could be, you know, and it got better and better and better. I remember over the year, I think it was SimCity 10 we were up to at one point. So is that what you're using to help you? Is that how you model this then? I just don't understand. Like, something's not clicking in my head, because lots of great data. You have some outstanding data here, but I just don't understand how we apply it right now. Like, I'm missing something. I'm sorry.
Maybe I'll make an attempt here.
Okay.
So in our report, we've kind of made some assumptions and some modeling to understand what the total potential demand is for retailing in your community based on population growth, both in Colwood and in the West Shore. That demand translates into a floor space requirement. So basically, if the market grows to a certain extent, here's how much you can accommodate. Our strategy kind of helps you understand, do you let out more land available for retailing? Do you retract your retailing footprint? And that's done through land use and zoning bylaws. So your land use bylaw is very permissive. You allow retailing everywhere. But you want to cut that back a little bit because you can't have too much retailing footprint in some areas. You want to focus demand where it makes sense. And that's what we try to recommend in our report. That's kind of one step. The second step is really recommendations on how to make retail viable from a positioning perspective. So, you know, obviously there's a development case and pro forma case for the developers. They need to make money back on their investment, but the areas need to be viable for retailing from a again, a marketing standpoint. So creating a sterilized highway-oriented environment might not be effective because no one's going to want to land that location. So there's some recommendations in there simply on how to design and implement these areas. In other projects that we've done with City of Vancouver, for instance, we've made very, as Sandra mentioned, strict recommendations on where retailing should go and how much land should be made available. They've incorporated that into their local area plans, and then that's where they have enabling policy. You could do that as well through this work, although we recommend probably best done through zoning. So really, this is where you want to add more commercial zoning in your community. Naturally, your input is really important. I think Sandra hit it on the head there. You know, we are providing information for your, you know, to help you understand how to guide the shape of your community, but we're not telling you how to do it. Really, this is, you know, perhaps the best way to have a viable retailing output from now into the future.
Okay.
One of the key ideas is retail really requires population, and in the Royal Bay neighborhood, it's going to be a long time to reach to see more retail development there because of the population growth. Right now, businesses don't want to go there because there are not enough people living in the area. And so what we try to do, and you can have beautiful pictures and show, you know, coffee shops, whatever, but the coffee shop owner doesn't want to pay the lease on a space right now because there's not enough clients, potential clients in the area. So that's part of what this report is trying to express is to give you an indication of what you can expect from a timeline to see this commercial development. The gateway plan for Colwood Corners is beautiful and is aspirational. And we want to provide a reality check on what you can actually expect from retailers in that area. So that's another aspect of this report that to keep in mind.
There's just a couple other questions here from other council members here. Councilor, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm finding it very hard to follow your presentation because earlier you said that you did look at how far people are willing to travel in the West Shore to go to retail options. And Royal Bay is well within that travel range from a fairly large population. As I see it, the problem is that the same things that are available in Royal Bay are available on Goldstream Avenue, are available in View Royal, they're available in Souk, they're available in downtown Victoria, Central Saanich, Sydney, you name it. So what I was hoping to find is, did you evaluate what we might offer that is not otherwise locally available?
Absolutely. JP, do you want to jump on that one, or should I go for it?
Well, one of the I can start, and we touched on this earlier, was differentiating from what exists in other areas. And Langford right now has a lot of auto-oriented retail, and there's not many more businesses, retailers, that are looking for that type of space on the West Shore. So what you're looking for is a different type of retail. As far as people driving, people are driving for retail, but are they driving to Royal Bay? And to have successful businesses there, you can either have a really boutique, attractive business that doesn't exist somewhere else, that people are going to drive to visit that store. And that's one of the, experiential retail is something that is a trend that people talk about, is more than just, people getting the goods they want. They want to feel good about their shopping experience, and creating environments where people want to visit is something that needs to happen. But if we're talking about Royal Bay, there's still not enough people immediately in the area that are going to support a lot of new businesses there. It's going to take time. The saying that people say is retail follows rooftops, not treetops. So there needs to be more rooftops and population nearby to support new businesses. Aaron, is there something else you want to?
No, that was fantastic. I was just going to talk about proximity and distance decay, but you've translated much better than I can.
Okay.
So on that note, though, I mean, it doesn't matter if we're talking about Royal Bay or we're talking about Colwood Corners. When you talk about Colwood Corners, we have fewer businesses now than we had 30 years ago in terms of diversity of businesses. And so I think that there are a number of places, thinking of the Capital Regional District, where there are co-locations of, I don't know what you would call it, but retailers that are friendly to one another in terms of their clientele, whether it's, shoe stores co-located with apparel, or find that on Fort Street. You can find that in Sydney. You can find that in different locations where they found certain mixes that are mutually beneficial. But how do we identify what's missing locally within the West Shore and put it there? Because it isn't in Langford either, and it isn't at the big box stores. And I'm not looking to put a big box store in, but I am looking to find ways to support a diversity of opportunity for business in Colwood. So I'm just trying to figure out where that works and where it doesn't work. And I didn't understand what you were telling us about parking.
Sure, maybe I'll give that an attempt. So fundamentally, the way your parking bylaw is structured right now is that it encourages a lot of surface level parking. To land that parking on a site, you need to moat your site with parking around it, as opposed to having perhaps less parking where you could fit it in the back. That's one concern. The second one is very clearly. Sorry, my kid is just running here.
Okay.
Please not right now. Sorry about that, folks. It's bedtime here. So the other issue with parking is that the amounts that are recommended, they're potentially oversupplied. Now, Colwood is and will be for the near future an automobile-oriented community. So folks will travel a good long distance to get to where they need to go, and they need to park once they get there. Now, as your communities densify, specifically Colwood Corners, where there's a lot of units on the horizon, you will have more opportunity for folks to walk or potentially cycle access those retailers. That gives you an opportunity for to really open things up a little bit. So you can have a slightly more attractive road orientation, which is what is called for in your gateway plan. You can hopefully then unlock some smaller retail units, which allows for smaller retailers or more diverse retailing set to locate there. And finally, if you open up Colwood Corners to a cycle orientation, then you can get some stop and go shoppers, which I think is the other kind of important aspect. Those folks don't require parking at all. Bikes are low space requirements. The respending effect from cyclists is actually quite high. And they seem to make very good shoppers. I don't know if that answered your question at all. If you need more information,
I'd like to add one point, if I may. Councillor was talking about supporting, I think, independent businesses, and it is tricky for independent businesses to move into new retail space, because new retail space will be expensive to develop. Construction costs are high, as everyone knows, and so the person who's built that space is going to want to lease it out for as much as possible, and the people that pay the highest rents are more national franchises. So to allow for independent businesses, a range in sizes is really helpful. So if you promote the development of smaller units, then you have an increased likelihood of getting some new independent businesses in locations. So there's a balance of smaller size units and bigger units. And that's something that is touched on in the report too. You know, we're looking at population growth and spending and how people typically spend their money. What types of businesses can be looked at, can be expected in these nodes, and what types of spaces do those businesses tend to want?
Thank you. And last question is, you mentioned lease when you were speaking about businesses, and it's my understanding in speaking to small business owners that ownership is something that they seek but cannot find. Is there anything in your strategy that would look at ownership other than leases?
That is a good, that's a great point. And some businesses do look for strata space that they can purchase. As far as that, it doesn't, you know, that can be something that we could mention in our policy recommendations, but we were really focused on how much retail should be going into these different nodes, what that might look like, what types of retail that would be. We weren't looking at the strata versus lease question. But it is a good point. Aaron, do you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to suggest that regulating for strata use is very difficult. I'm not sure there actually is like an apparatus available at the kind of the land use level to get strata ownership for commercial units. It certainly is a thing. Out here in Vancouver, there are a couple strata malls. And one of the issues with that type of tenure is that folks will hold those storefronts vacant because they own them. And they're just holding them as capital investments for future resale. So there is some flexibility with them, but they do have some drawbacks as well.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We haven't got through the first slide and there's still more councillors that have questions here. I would like to make a suggestion to council right now that I think this has to go to committee, either committee of the whole. I know we haven't had one, but it looks like because this is such an important plan that I just don't think we're going to get through discussion tonight. So this is my suggestion is I'd like to refer this either to committee of the whole or to planning and land use. We'll figure that one out, where the best place for this to land is. But I would like to make that motion right now. Second? Okay, thank you. So any discussion on this? Because there is a lot. I've got pages and pages and pages of notes here, so I think it's important. Okay, on that note, I'll ask the question right now. All those in favor for referring it? Thank you. Motion carries. Thank you very much, gentlemen. You've got a great subject here, and there's so much to discuss, but I'm just concerned that we didn't get past the first slide, and yet every council member has a question here for you, and there's a lot more, believe me. So, I do want to refer this to committee because I think it's a better place to discuss this and have the wholesome discussion. Thank you very much, gents.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you. I'm just going to take a health recess here for about 25 after, and we'll get together back at 8:25, please. Thank you. Sorry. So no one heard that goof up that I made there. So we're back on to section 8, which is bylaws. And bylaw number 2049, financial plan bylaw 2025 to 2029. That's adoption. Okay, thank you very much. Seconder, Councilor Olson, Jensen and Olson. Discussion? I just have one question. What is there going to be some impact, with all these potential tariffs? Will there be some impact on our budget at all? Have you guys looked at that and sort of said, like maybe the material costs? Have you looked at an impact?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Mayor. In short, it's too soon to tell.
Mhm.
There's a regional CFO meeting tomorrow. We'll start discussions. There certainly could be impacts, and it's my expectation that as we get more information in general on what could potentially be coming our way, we'll then be looking at what projects, initiatives, or core operations those may affect, and we'll report back out.
Fair enough. That's a fair answer. And the second question I have is that, have we given ourselves a deadline as far as the potential upside? What I'm talking about is the distribution of the RCMP civilians and who pays for what, and our side coming down a little bit. When are sort of the deadlines so that you have some great news for us?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Great question. So we have not adjusted our core operating budget. As you heard from me, there are a number of pressures with respect to the financial implications of our policing service delivery. My expectation is we could potentially see a savings with respect to the cost of municipal support staff. My expectation is that those savings will be offset by incremental cost pressures related to e-com, the potential Vancouver Island Integrated Crime Unit. So any savings that may materialize later in this year as we continue with that transition, I anticipate will provide funding for the future costs associated with this service area.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. And on that note, I'll see no other discussion points. I'll call the question. Are there any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. We've adopted. And I shall take another recess here. We'll go in camera. Go in camera. If I get it. Sorry? Yeah. Can I get it? Thank you. Second. Discussion. Any opposed? Seeing none. Thank you very much, gents.